Hello and welcome back to another episode of Taking Back Saturday, a Happy Buyers Club podcast where we break down the real estate market each and every Friday and help home buyers build confidence, follow a process, and hopefully buy really happy. I'm your host, Chayse Jones, and joining me as he does every week, every day, my man on the inside, Sam Hunter. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Back from a week and a bit at the beach, which was nice. I haven't seen you every day this week.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Just cut that. He's been left me in the lurch for the better part of 7 days.
You wouldn't know that I've been at the beach. I'm actually more white, I think, than before because all we do is spend our days when the UV is too high inside watching repeats of Peter Rabbit. But other than that, very good week and good to be back.
Sun safety, nice work. Guys, we put out the call out on Instagram last night for Q&A day, which we love because it's just a really good chance to sort of get a sense check for what people are thinking about and want to hear from us about. If you haven't already jumped on the Runaway Train, which is our Instagram page, like do it now. Get in early. The rewards will pay off forever. So let's just get cracking, Sam. Question number one from I won't reveal any usernames right now. I've got to keep that private. Question number one: how can we manage our expectations better?
For sure. I think we wanted to do this, as you said, for a couple of reasons. One, we don't just want to determine what gets spoken about every single week. And then two, we actually have some people who listen to this show now, which is epic. And I still don't really believe it. And it's cool. And so let's make it more participatory. Took me a lot to get that out.
So it's not just your mum and my mum listening to this on repeat for the week.
We make our children listen to these as we're driving the car just to boost the numbers. No, it's good. And I think actually it helps us understand the relevancy of the market. We're in our own little bubble. There are a hell of a lot more people buying houses outside of what we're doing than there are inside of what we're doing. So if we can actually help and impact those, it makes a big difference. So how do we manage expectations better? I said to Chase, this question came through this morning and he was like, is that a real question? Did you write that? And surprisingly, all five of these are real questions. Expectations play a big part of real estate.
For sure.
Right? We had a conversation with a potential new client this morning and we said, good real estate decisions actually come from a place of compromise. That's probably where you start. If you go into buying a house, and there's a meme for this that I actually...
There's a meme for everything.
For sure there is. But I've got this one. We'll queue it up for Saturday. If you go into this expecting a 10 out of 10 experience, we're going to buy our dream home. It's going to be the first offer we make. We're not going to be asked to negotiate. We'll be in and out in 2.5 weeks. You're going to be bitterly disappointed. And most people, anyway, we've seen it happen in the past where people have just had a real estate experience that has been pretty special, but it doesn't happen for most people. And if you go into it expecting that, then you're setting yourselves up to either miss out quickly and feel like you missed out for the wrong reasons, as in it's too much money, whatever it is, or you're setting yourselves up to miss out a lot and 6 months later
you're downtrodden.
You're talking to people like us instead of having bought a house.
Yeah, that sucks for you. The first thing that came to mind when I saw this question was homework, and it's because it's the buzzword for us. We use that with any potential client of ours, is because we want to do all the homework, all the hard work, well ahead of even starting to represent someone and search on their behalf. It allows clarity for them as well. So we look back at historical sales in the last, call it 3 to 6 months, of things in your budget, your comfy budget, that tick your supposed must-haves. And then we go through that exercise and allow people to be like, hey, hell yeah, would 100%, if I was emotionally and financially ready, have bought that. I like that. Yeah, we would have considered it. No thanks, hell no. And if we are seeing a lot of hell yeahs, great, let's do it. Let's go find the next one. And once we find the right thing, we can move quickly and confidently knowing that, it exists. If we're seeing an absolute wall of hell no's, and guys, this is an exercise you can do yourself. Send us a DM. I'll show you how to set up the spreadsheet. And it is a pretty simple exercise of just looking back historically at what's sold. And if you are seeing a wall of hell no's, then there's now talk of compromise. Because something has to change, whether it's budget or whether it's product or whether it's location. One of those things has to change so that we're seeing some more likes or hell yeahs.
For sure. It's almost a case of agreeing what your expectations actually look like. We talk about that post-it note exercise, and we do this with people. We bust out post-it notes and we say, what's important to you? Write them down, stick it on the wall. What's important to you? Write it down, stick it on the wall. And the ones that match, you don't necessarily have to have a great deal of like dialogue about. But in 90% of cases, there's a couple of post-it notes that are your must-haves and my must-haves that don't match. And they're the ones you have to talk about. And doing that before you're getting in the car at an open home when it's going to auction next weekend sets you up for success way more than it does rushing it and potentially either missing out or bidding on the wrong property. And suddenly 30 days later, you're like, oh, we're moving into a house that was kind of, it is what it is. We're not overly excited about it. And that happens to people because they don't manage expectations. They don't prepare early enough. They don't do the super boring, monotonous work that we thrive on, I think, and they don't set themselves up for success. They just jump into the market with both feet, hoping to buy something, and they'll kind of figure the rest out later. And the rest is hard to figure out later.
Definitely. I think for the person that's asked this question, it's not so much about managing expectations while you're on the search. It's about managing the expectations before you even start.
Love that.
Definitely. Like, we don't perform miracles. And we say this to prospective clients and clients alike, that we're not out there to find the one in a million. We sometimes do, and miracles can happen, but very rarely do they. So we set the expectations about, hey, what we're doing is a very boringly consistent process, but we're setting ourselves up to execute that process. So all we're doing is just putting time and energy into it and just leveraging the relationships that we have to just get through more doors, create more opportunities, and de-risk you while you're doing it. So
love that.
You can do that for yourself, everyone out there. Do your homework, kids. Question number 2. How concerned should you be with flood zones? Prices don't reflect said risk.
Yeah, I actually really do agree with the last part of that question. Yeah. Prices not necessarily reflecting the risk. There are a lot of people who've grown up in Brisbane in a street that maps for flooding and have never had a problem, and therefore they make the assumption that they'll never have a problem if they buy a property just like that. We like to acknowledge risk and then ideally mitigate it as much as possible. There's levels of flood risk. I think it's not as simple as, oh, that's got a blue overlay on it.
Yeah, it's going to be up to the top of the eaves.
Yeah, let's absolutely not buy there. What flood mapping does or doesn't necessarily take into account is how often those events occur. Like the 1 in 100-year flood in Brisbane, anyway, is now more like 1 in a 20-year event. And I'm sure that council will update those maps when it happens again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's some people are more bullish on property than others. Some people are more bullish to get into the market regardless. A good way of assessing flood risk is get an insurance quote.
Definitely. I was nearly going to say that.
Yeah, an insurer will tell you how often that house has had a claim against it, or how often a house with the same risk in the same street, whether it's next door or across the road, has had a claim against it. And that gives you a better measure of risk versus the council flood mapping. It's a great place to start. And if you are adamant that there's you will buy nothing with no flood, it's a great place to stop as well. If it's got anything on it, walk away. We're more cautious of overland flow than creek flooding. Reason being that it rains pretty heavily a lot for 4 months of the year in Brisbane. So you get a lot more flash water events, not necessarily flash flooding, but heavy storm, it rains for an hour, there's 40 mil in an hour, you're going to get some overland flow down the street into your yard, whatever it might be, and that can cause some significant damage to properties. The 2.5 week long rain event that causes everyone's gutters to overflow into the water and the creeks come up, that is less of a common event, so necessarily you've got less risk. So yeah, we've definitely looked at properties for clients in the past where there's been creek flooding risk or Brisbane River flow risk, and we've gone, you know what, we feel that's acceptable, but the decision rests with you. Here's what the insurance said, and you're paying a little bit of a premium, but here's an example of a property that's got overland flow where every time it rains, you're going to have storm anxiety, and here's the insurance quote for that, and it is more significant because that storm water can damage your house more than a little bit of water potentially coming in your backyard once every 30 years.
Exactly right. So we're talking not only risk, but realities, because like insurance is not just like, oh, hey, this is giving me a broader snapshot of what the risk is, but it's also the reality of having to pay higher insurances for the time that you spend in that house, which is the reality. And another reality is if you're buying something with a risk or a challenge, whether that be flooding in this case, or whether it's main roads or whatever it may be, we've always got to consider, if we're here for 10 years and we're going to have the same problem on the, well, we'll call it problem on the way out, and we're going to have the same set of buyers where people are like, hey, that's mapped for, flooding. Like, oh, but it was dry the whole time. Well, that's what the guy said to us the first time as well, and yet here you are maybe having to compromise on that sale price because you took that challenge on.
Yep, and I there's just not enough houses in Brisbane, so that's why I think prices don't necessarily reflect the risk, but it's understanding what that risk actually looks like. Council will give you worst case scenarios, and that's a really good place to start. But again, I think, going and whether it's comparing the market or calling a couple of specific insurance brokers who know Brisbane, Suncorp, not the cheapest, but knows Brisbane, and I imagine has their own meteorology team, right? That is plugged straight into their insurance premiums because they tweak them every time it rains. It's a really nice place to start. So that, hey, we're buying a property potentially at 2 or 3 or even 5% less than the one literally up the street, up the hill cost, but it's going to cost an extra $1,000 a year just to live there.
Sure, and context as well. Like, it's all well and good that it maps for it, but just even take the time to look at the street view and stuff like that, because places, particularly that have been built in the last, call it 20 years, 25 years, have done things to mitigate said risks. You see that properties are built up higher, and just having that context so you can sort of understand what a potential rain event would look like and how that property would be affected by it. Even the style of property, how it's built. We often see, if you see a whole bunch of houses built up on stumps, you're like, okay, they know it's coming.
Yeah. And we had a look at a place last week, Coorparoo Townhouse, really beautiful townhouse. Like, somehow the developer's built it for himself. And you look at it on a map and it's in Coorparoo.
Just up from Norman Creek.
Near Norman Creek, and it's as blue as it gets. But the building will be 2.5 metres above street level. So, yes, it's going to have an overlay to it, but if that building got wet, everyone's got problems.
Yeah, there'd be schools underwater. Poor old East Lakes Club would be, swimming around. Okay, question number 3. Is it possible to upgrade to a nicer property given how expensive the market is?
We debated about whether we're going to answer this question or not, because there's so many variables, like, what property are you upgrading from?
Yes.
When did you buy that property? What does a nicer property look like to you? Where is that nicer property located? Are you buying closer to the CBD, potentially a more expensive area? Are you buying further out?
My first thought was that, yes, I feel like those that have been in the market and have been for, whether it be 3 years, whether it be 7 years, that you probably have experienced some sound equity growth.
For sure.
This is assuming this person's from Brisbane. But we've seen the market grow, very consistently and at times very strongly. And those people they've unlocked maybe that next tier of purchasing now, if they so choose. Sure. Life has meant kids or, more pets or whatever it may be. And all of a sudden it's like, cool, I've got $500,000 in equity. I have now potentially the opportunity to move up into that next tier of purchasing a nicer property, call it in this instance.
And I think it comes with, again, coming back to where we started, it's how do you manage your expectations, right? It's like, okay, we live in our 3-bedroom, maybe 1.5 bathroom post-war house. It's sitting on 607 square meters. We've done very little to it. Maybe we're going to put a Bunnings kitchen in before we sell it. We've got a skillion roof and a deck out the back, right? Pretty typical kind of first home buyer territory into manageable improvements that maybe people have made over the last 5-10 years. You're definitely going to have a reasonable amount of cash sitting in that property that gives you the option to leverage and go and get that 4 and 2, maybe on a 405 or a bigger block, whatever it might be. What you're looking for is going to be dependent on a few things. Lifestyle circumstances, as you say, maybe you've got a couple of kids that you didn't have then and you just need more space, or you need that second living area because you're sick of watching
tripping over on Matchbox cars.
Right? And your kids might be getting to an age where potentially they can't share a room anymore because it's going to get a bit weird. So there's all those lifestyle factors, but then there's also upgrading. Usually comes with upgrading your debt as well.
Yeah.
So as a family, if your kids are growing up, potentially the kids are getting more expensive as well. Do you want to bring in private school fees, additional mortgage costs?
Berries.
Yeah, it costs
so many berries.
It costs over $100,000 to move house in a lot of circumstances. And that's real money that you're sort of picking up, putting in the fire pit and lighting a fire for a good reason, right? But do you have that in you? And and do all that maths. Go and talk to a good mortgage broker, go and talk to a good financial planner, map out, like live the budget of the nicer home for 3 months.
Yeah, talk to a sales agent. Get an idea of a worst case scenario for the sale of your property, and then, like you say, reverse engineer it. Do the budget, everything, calculating every outgoing, every potential net ingoing on the new property, and then guess what? It's homework time.
Yeah.
Is it possible to get something nicer? Maybe.
Yeah.
And it's different for every person's circumstance.
And while you're doing all that, I think we talk to particularly first-time buyer clients of ours. We talk about living that budget for a long time, like really financially understand what it's like to have a mortgage, own a house. Because in most circumstances, it is more than what rent will cost you. Particularly if you're living in your 2-bedroom unit, you got that great little inner city lifestyle, and you go buy a family home somewhere that might be 3 or 4 bedrooms. You're going from, maybe $2,700 a month to over $5,500 a month in a lot of circumstances. That hurts. And all the money that you've saved in the bank goes out. Psychologically, having a bank account that feels like it's got quite a lot of money in it to very little money, you're like, all we've got is this cool house. Right? So, yeah, we always suggest, like, park that money in a different account that you can't see it every day. So psychologically, it's not there. Start allocating whatever your mortgage broker has told you your costs will be monthly, fortnightly, whatever it is, into that account as well. So you're actually building a bigger nest egg, and see what you have left over. See how it actually affects your lifestyle.
Yeah, how does it feel?
It's no different if you're upgrading. So you've got this comfortable life, and that's the only reason you're thinking about moving, right? Is that you're pretty comfy. I think if you're stressed about your finances in the home you're in now, upgrading is probably not on the table. So there's a level of comfort. There's probably some lifestyle factors. Work out if you can make it work before you decide to try and make it work. I think there's plenty of people who are upgrading day in, day out at the moment. And I think a lot of people are recognizing that the busiest part of the market is the house. When I say busiest, like the most competitive part of the market are the houses that people are upgrading from, because they're bringing in investors, first home buyers, downsizers. So if you think you've got $500,000 worth of equity, you pick the right agent, you might actually unlock even another 100 of that. And that might just be enough to get you into that upgrading in a comfortable way. That's a big, we don't use that language willy-nilly. Like moving house, buying house, it has to be comfortable. If you are stretching yourself, it's not worth it. No. It genuinely isn't worth it. Like, you don't want to buy a house and just have to eat 2 minute noodles or baked beans.
Yeah, and then find 8 months later, this is too tight.
For sure.
We might have to go back the other way and burn some more money to move again.
Talk to a good, listen to a good podcast, talk to the experts, live the budget a little bit longer, find out if it is worth it to you guys as well, and then do your homework. And ideally, if you are then upgrading, you're going to be in a position where you've got a good agent for your place. You know realistically what worst case scenario looks like. Whether you sell first and get a longer settlement or bridge, that decision is up to you. Listen to a podcast from a couple of weeks ago if you want to know what we think about that. Then make decisions, and as we talked about earlier, execute on your plan. And you'll find that, yes, it's expensive in that upgrade, but ideally you've made up a lot of that gap with equity over the last few years if you are upgrading.
Nice one. If anyone else finds a good podcast to listen to, let us know. Is buying a coast property a good investment?
My in-laws would tell you yes. Yeah. I'd actually tried to talk my in-laws out of buying a property in the Sunshine Coast in 2017. Thankfully for them, they didn't. I didn't talk them out of it because it's done exceptionally well. Coasts are cyclical, almost bubbly markets. We're only going to talk about Southeast Queensland coast here because I think that's what we understand. The Gold Coast was massively undervalued for a really long time. It was just seen as a real holiday market, and now people are actually understanding that, and I think COVID brought this on as it did so many regional opportunities. People saw it as, we don't just have to go there for 2 weeks at Christmas or a weekend to get out of Melbourne in winter and come up to the Gold Coast. This is actually a pretty epic place to live, and you can be inland but still only 15 minutes from the beach, and you get to the beach early enough. There's always car park, maybe not these days. So the Gold Coast has gone nuts in the last 5 years, and I think probably has a couple of years left in it. Same thing with the Sunshine Coast. Sunshine Coast is behind Gold Coast in certain parts in value. I think there's more value to be found for investment or holiday homes or a sea change in the Sunny Coast than the Gold Coast. Personal opinion. There's just more infrastructure planned there. There's more in it. It's quite a lifestyle. So if you're looking for a place to go to actually live, that sunny over Gold Coast for me anyway. And then it's what are you going to buy? So you're going to buy a 2-bedroom unit surrounded by thousands of other 2-bedroom units. Probably not going to get the same level of capital growth, but it might work really well from a cash flow perspective in terms of it's always rentable all year round. Versus do you go and buy the low set shack 10 minutes back from the beach that probably will be rezoned one day, maybe, definitely. I know there's a lot of land banking happening in Caloundra and Mooloolaba at the moment. There's these like 2-bedroom villas on main roads that are selling for like $750,000.
They know something.
Well, you can build 9 stories on the block, right? So it is a bit of a game of monopoly for some people. If you buy one, then you just tap on the next door neighbour who's lived there for 20 years. When you're thinking of going, mate, I'd like to be the first phone call, because then you could literally put your property developer hat on and see what happens if you've got that capital and risk appetite, which not everybody does. Long story short, I think if you can find an asset that is in a relatively small complex that has a decent enough yield, that is close enough to the beach that you could rent it all year round to people on a holiday for sure, or is close enough to amenities that someone might actually want to live there full time as their own house. Yeah, they make good investments, but you've just got to recognize that they are cyclical towns. There is a lot of holiday income that comes in and a lot of holiday income that goes out. So you probably wouldn't expect to see the consistency of gains as you would a major capital city. But when it spikes pretty hard and everyone's like, holy shit, this is expensive now.
Yeah, definitely. Talk to an expert in the areas. This speaks to me, this question. This could have been one from me because, sure. You know me, the water speaks to me.
Yeah.
There's only so much water.
We were looking at like a 3-bedroom townhouse for you down at Gold Coast like a year ago.
Oh, mate, if only.
Yeah.
Well, here we are, still sitting in this studio, dreaming of the water.
They could not be something further away from the water as they put us surrounded by sound foam.
Yeah, thank you, Timu. Rub it in. Last one. Can you trust an agent's building and pest report?
Yeah. What you guys can't see after this question is this is a full podcast.
Yeah, it's written there. But at a real high level sort of shot at this thing, I would say the answer is yes. Yeah. But there are certain caveats to that. And this is something that we would advise people to do. If you have seen a property, they've had a building and pest inspection done, the report is available for you to view. First thing you want to be looking for is that inspector covered insurance-wise for the liability of the findings in that report? Don't make the assumption that they are. Contact details are on every report as well, so you can call them and ask about said insurances. You can also ask about the transfer of that liability as well. So because the seller has purchased the report or the agent has purchased the report, their name is on it. Mm-hmm. If you are the eventual buyer, you want to make sure that report is transferred into your name. Ask them how much that costs. It's usually $300, call it there or thereabouts. And it is important because the findings of that report, you want to make sure that they're going to stand behind them, and that if anything was to be missed or something was, you were misled in some way about the status of a particular part of that property, you want to make sure that you can be covered under that. Another thing with reports provided by sellers, not that the length of a report should dictate the quality of it, but if you do receive a report that's a handful of pages, you need to ask some questions.
That's it, isn't it? Questions.
And it is just questions, because all you want is clarity. If there's generally nothing to be hidden, they're not trying to hide anything, but having someone that's performed a report or performed an inspection and that has given you a thorough report, 50 pages, 90 pages, some fun nights spent in front of the laptop reading those. It just means you're getting a total picture of this property. Like I said, those contact details are there on the report. You can call them. You can ask questions about findings. They are going to read quite brutal for the most part, and it's because of said liability. They want to make sure that even if something is pretty damn good, it's just adequate. And that's the reality of what a building and pest report would look like. So are they covered insurance-wise for the findings of that report? Can you transfer that liability to yourself as the eventual buyer. Do you understand the report and what it's trying to tell you? Do you need to get more context? Ask them about it. And lastly, if you feel that it's none of the above or not enough of those questions answered in the right fashion, maybe it's time you just go and organise your own one.
Sure. And that's always an option. Like the point I'll make to that is never in, I don't know how many years of doing this, either selling houses or buying houses, if you provided a report or we're provided a report from a selling agent and the seller and we say we want to do our own, never has an agent said no.
Yeah.
Right. So there is always the option. If somebody does, that ain't the house for you. Yeah, for sure. That no matter what happens, there's something wrong with that place. But every agent's going to welcome it, right? They're going to welcome you doing more due diligence because you're positioning yourselves as probably the person that's going to pay the most money for that house. And that is ultimately their job. So I think there probably is a whole podcast in what does a good report look like? What does a bad report look like? What are obvious red flags aside from not seeing a QBCC license number and a report saying we are not indemnifying ourselves for anything found in this report? We've seen those, right?
Definitely.
On a more regular occurrence than we should. And we just, if it's the house for us, we bought one that had that report and we went and did our own, and it was on the 70 odd pages and there was photos and comments for every little thing in that house, and we were able to confidently go, right,
cool,
we're in. So don't feel like you have to rely on them. But certainly it's pretty clear when someone's done a good job versus someone's done a bit of a hatchet job, I think.
That's right. Well, I'm looking forward to that podcast. Tune in a fortnight's time for the Building and Pest podcast. Guys, that is Taking Back Saturday for this week. He's Sam. I'm Chayse. Cue the song.